the new board chair took over and said, "We're going to eat in the cafeteria with the students every time we have a board meeting." It was such an incredible way for them to get in touch with the students, get energized, and really hear what the students think.
That was Drumm McNaughton, higher ed board consultant and host of the Changing Higher Ed podcast. We had a great conversation about the role of boards at colleges and universities, how they can best play that role, how they can balance oversight, insight, and foresight, how they can avoid micromanaging and stay in touch with students. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in higher ed and board governance.
How long have you got? I find it fascinating because I had no idea I was going to be getting into this type of thing. And I went back to graduate school after getting out of the Navy. It had been 20 years, and I really enjoyed my studies there. I enjoyed flying in the Navy as well. But when I got into education, I realized it was a calling for me. I really enjoyed the ability to get up in the classroom and bring the best out of people. I found I was a natural teacher. It was just normal for me to move down that path, and I moved up into roles with greater responsibility, department chair, chair of the university curriculum committee. I was a provost for a while. But I realized that I also had the ability to understand how institutions should work, not necessarily how they do work, because you've got a lot of really great institutions out there and you've got a lot that really need to improve. I'd always loved consulting, so I ended up merging the two in higher ed consulting. I also found out I'd sat on boards for 15 plus years, and I had a very good understanding of board governance and how it should work. And so, to make a short story very long, that's how I got into this work.
I like that you've been on so many different sides of the table, moving up the ladder and being on the board, being an instructor, being a leader, being a provost, being a consultant. That must give you great perspective.
Having seen it from so many different sides, it's like sitting on a
Mhm.
tree. The higher you go up in the tree, the more you get a holistic perspective of how everything should work, not only the tree, but everything around it as well. And
Yeah.
by having been in multiple positions and different perspectives, you get to see the way the big picture should work and the way sometimes it doesn't.
I would love your perspective on how should boards work? How do you define the role of a board of trustees at a college or university?
That is a very complex question. There are certain laws, statutes that govern the way that boards should work.
Right, like
These
fiduciary responsibility, that kind of thing.
exactly. And it depends too whether you're a public university or a private university. It boils down to fiduciary duties, the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, the duty of obedience. The duty of care being you're going to care for the institution as you would as if it were your own family, which means delving into the documents, understanding how things are working or not working, and making suggestions for changes. The duty of loyalty means your loyalty is to that university or that board. Uh, this is where your conflicts of interest can come in. It was just
Right.
Great example of this that unfortunately came out at Michigan State University, where the board chair appeared to be more loyal. And this report just came out from the attorneys who studied the board, appeared to be more loyal to a donor than she was to the university. And so that duty of loyalty is critical. Your duty of obedience is you will obey the appropriate laws. So really it boils down to those three duties: fiduciary duties, duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. And all of your duties on the board should roll up into those things.
And what are some of those key duties? Things like approving the strategic plan, the budget, but give us a little, those are maybe the obvious ones. Give us a little color on important board duties.
Oh, you want color, huh? You shouldn't ask that.
Well, you're wearing for our listeners and viewers, you're wearing a bright blue sweater. So I don't know.
Thank I don't know if that's good or not, but anyway,
Yeah,
the
it would be
board's
good in Kentucky. Yeah,
it
that looks
would
like
be, but
actually
it's
Kentucky blue.
oh, maybe it is. I thought it was closer to North Carolina, but
Maybe.
they're
Or
both
Duke.
big basketball rivals. So
Yeah.
anyway, the board's role is really to think strategically, regularly assess what's working, what isn't, mandate rigorous strategic planning process that's tied to budget allocations, setting goals for the institution that the administration needs to do, and then really focus on how the board can help the president and his or her administration. So it's the board's role to think strategically. And that doesn't mean that the administration doesn't do that, but they should be working in partnership. The president and his or her administration develops and faithfully implements the strategies and policies that the boards approve. And the two of them should be working collegially with each other. And that famous thing, the board shouldn't be micromanaging. AGB has got, and all the boards that I work with have got a saying called NIFO: nose in, fingers out.
What give us an example of where you cross the line between strategy and micromanagement.
Micromanaging is telling the administration how to do their job, i.e., you should be admitting these type of students rather than saying these are the standards that we have. How are students fitting in? Are you finding the kinds of students? The best thing to do is ask questions rather than tell. That's understanding, holding administration accountable for outcomes versus telling them how to do their job unless asked.
Right. It seems like one way of thinking about this is the difference between the what and the how. You can drive the what in terms of the goals, but not the how in terms of how they're achieved.
Exactly.
Some of the best leadership advice I ever got was delegate outcomes, not tasks. Give people a sense of what you're trying to achieve as opposed to a list of tasks to do. What role do you think boards can play in student success?
From a student success perspective, they should be monitoring the numbers that indicate student success: graduation rates, persistence rates, job placement rates, and even to some degree, what are the salaries that students are making when they graduate out of programs. The bottom line is a student who has invested money in going to this institution better off than they would be had they not come. Do they have a job? One of the big challenges right now is that students are going through, they're investing all this money in their education, and they're not finding good jobs, higher paying jobs until into their early 30s. Yes, unemployment is very low, but are students being trained properly to enter the job market? A
Right.
lot of folks.
You don't want underemployment either. Yeah.
Exactly. Underemployment is very bad. And so with this, boards should be asking the tough questions. Are we preparing students for their careers? What are the things that we need to be focusing on Are you focusing? What's the data? Without getting into the micromanaging of telling them how to do it.
Right. So setting and monitoring metrics, which I always think of metrics as like goals in disguise, because those are effectively the targets people are looking to hit. Um,
Mhm.
and you mentioned graduation, retention, career placement, salary, which gets to ROI and payback and so forth. And then asking the tough questions to prompt the administration and hold them accountable.
Absolutely. The other piece, and this depends on how independent your board is. And when I say independent, do they have a broad perspective on what's going on in the world? A lot of times boards can bring in a different perspective as to where industry is going. When we're doing planning with an institution, we call this future environmental scanning, which looks over multiple areas and kind of plans where the industries are going. If you think about football or soccer, if you think about hockey, you never throw the ball or push the puck to where the player is. You want to push the puck out or the football to where the player is going to be. Higher ed needs to do that as well. And boards should be asking administrations, where are industries going? We have a nursing degree here. Is it still relevant? Is it going to still be relevant in 5, in 10 years? Because it takes a while to build up a new program. AI is a great example of this. Most higher ed institutions have just pushed their hand up and said, no, we are not going to do AI. Students can plagiarize too easily. And that's crazy. Yes, they can. So why aren't you teaching them ethical behaviors around AI?
Right.
Miami-Dade College is doing a fabulous job. They embraced AI 3 or 4 years ago and teaching students how to use AI ethically. Their president is doing a great job. And if the president wasn't doing a great job with that, the board should be asking, what are we doing about preparing students for the future with AI?
Right. Yeah. Like foregrounding career readiness and then asking the questions about preparation as part of that, whether it's specific skills, problem solving, teamwork, AI, new technologies.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like you mentioned AI, clearly that's changing the way a lot of people work. I'm interested in your take on what's changing the way boards work. Are boards functioning today the way they did 5, 10, 20 years ago? Or is it what's the same, what's different?
In a lot of ways, they are functioning the same, and in a lot of ways, they are different. You're seeing boards coming out with dashboards where they've got clear ability to monitor outcomes. This is a great use of technology, which really helps folks. The other thing that I'm really liking that I'm seeing with boards is I'm starting to see a greater diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't necessarily mean demographics, racial diversity, et cetera. Those are real hot buttons when it comes to higher education, especially with the politicalization of higher ed. When I say diversity, I look at it from a education, from an experience. Not everyone can see things the same way. We all see things differently. And by looking at and having boards with different perspectives on how students are acting, how they're attaining their objectives, it gives you a fuller perspective on how an institution is doing. And if you've ever heard of the Johari window,
Right.
you've what's known to me, what unknown to me, what's known to you, what's unknown, what do we both know? And then what is that area that we don't know? When you've got a diverse board, that area that we don't know becomes smaller and smaller, and we can make better decisions because of it.
I've always thought of the Johari window from the personal perspective. I love extending it to the team and saying, if you have a diversity of experiences, backgrounds, people, you can shrink the amount of things where you don't know what you don't know and collectively have that broader perspective. And I think you mentioned as an aside, but the politicization of higher ed is certainly a change. There's a real trend in terms of institutional advancement moving from individual donors to more corporate foundation and mega donors. Do you see that showing up with boards? Are the mega donors often board members?
They can be, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. When you get a donor on a board, you have to be very careful that the donor's interests don't override the best decisions. That multiple times, whether it be in higher ed, whether it be in political campaigns. If you've got a lot of money, you can have influence on a political campaign, potentially on a board at an institution, and you have to be very careful that you're still following your fiduciary duties and making sure that you're acting in the best interest of the institution and not necessarily in the best interest of the donor.
Yeah, just as an example, the Ruth Gottesman gave $1 billion to Albert Einstein School of Medicine in New York so that they can basically go tuition free. I don't think there's any mention of a board seat associated with
Mm-mm.
that gift. It's just basically about how do we get more and better doctors and ease the tuition burden and make the profession more accessible.
Unfortunately, we get into a lot of really gray areas. And I'm reviewing one institution's bylaws right now, and it has that the board chair has the final decision on ethical conflict of interest. That one is a little bit off for me. You have a governance committee. Why are you not referring this to a governance committee of people? Why is it you, as the chair, have the final say?
It's undermining the structure they've set up.
It,
If you have a governance committee, let them make those decisions.
exactly. And it also gives it to a panel of people so that Johari window gets a little smaller.
The unknown unknowns get smaller and the known knowns get bigger.
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned a governance committee. What are some of the key ways that boards structure themselves to align with trends and decisions and functions within a university?
Well, it really depends. There's multiple, most boards have a regular committee structure.
Mhm.
They'll have an academic affairs committee, a finance committee, an audit committee. Each committee has certain rules. They're set up by charter. Normally in your bylaws, it will say you will have these basic committees and that the board can can create task forces and committees as necessary. But you've got really 3 or 4 basic committees. A lot of times, you'll have an academic affairs committee, which incorporates students as
Mhm.
well, not students on the committee, the oversight of student affairs. Finance usually takes care of budget. It may also have development, fundraising. Audit committees generally separate because the audit committee is the one who is looking backwards. The finance committee should be looking forwards. So those are some of the committees, not depending on if it's a public or a private institution. It may be just a governance committee or a nominating and governance committee, which takes care of questions of governance as well as new people on the board. So those are just some of the committees that we see and we deal with.
I find myself presenting to a facilities or a building and grounds committee. Do you see that as well?
Yes, that's can be one of the basic committees. There's certain functions at an institution that needs board's oversight. And so structuring committees to be able to do that so that it's not a committee of the whole board, but just a subset. I know
Right.
one institution that I worked with, they were concerned there was too much of an hourglass model and that the board wasn't getting enough information from the institution. So they had permanent committees or permanent board members on the committees. And they also had ex officio members from staff to where the board committees could get information directly from the staff. Now, you have to be careful you're not cutting your president out with that. So anything that's brought up with a committee needs to be cleared through the president. But that's certainly one way to get a broader perspective on what's going on in the university.
We've talked about what the board does and how it's structured and the role that it can play in student success and how it's adapting to changes about data and diversity and politics and so forth. I'd love to hear some examples as you think about how boards can respond to these changes and enable student success.
There's a lot of institutions who are doing it really well. If you take a look at a Stanford or someone like that, they're keeping their pulse on what's going on, but they're not doing the micromanaging. There's a lot of good universities out there that have got good governance. There's a lot of folks that are doing really good jobs out there. Our firm has a board assessment that looks at 7 or 8 different categories. And I'm seeing a lot of really good results coming from that. I'm seeing a lot of institutions that are struggling in different areas. For example, I talked a little bit about Michigan State just a little while ago, but there's other institutions in Pacific Northwest area that have been put on show cause, which basically your accreditor has said, show us a reason why we should not pull your accreditation for board governance. I worked with a client not too long ago who had been put on warning by their accreditor for board and shared governance, that the board was not really in touch with what was going on. And the faculty, there was a lot of cultural issues that the administration had done everything that they possibly could to stamp out shared governance. Now, shared governance is not unique to higher education, but what it really does is it gives stakeholders a say in how the institution should be run. It has its origins from faculty being completely in charge of curriculum and having the majority, if not the final say on what is taught. That's changing, but even so, to have an administration do everything they can to stamp out shared governance, it causes problems from a cultural perspective as well as with your accreditor.
Getting input from a variety of stakeholders and advancing shared governance seems like another thing a board can do to advance student success. Um,
Yes.
and do you have,
One
go
e
ahead.
one example of that is many boards are now bringing a faculty member, the president of the faculty senate or someone like that, and a student on the board to be able to be involved in the discussions. I know the University of South Carolina does this. Now, sometimes the faculty member and the student are voting members. Sometimes they're not. In the case of a public institution such as South Carolina, it's legislated by statute. New Jersey does not permit faculty or students to be on the board. So the board can make them an ex officio member via their change of bylaws. So there are ways to do that, but it's important to have that faculty say on the board as well as the student. Another institution that I know, and this is Grand Valley State University up in
Right?
Michigan, they are incredible when it comes to innovation. This innovation initiative that they've got is called REP4, Rapid Education Prototyping for Change. There's 7 institutions across the country, part of this coalition. They share among themselves. But what Philly has done at Grand Valley is putting together groups of students who are in high school saying, what do you want your college education to look like? And taking that input and not necessarily doing everything that they're saying, but taking that input to help change the way they deliver education. This is something that her board supports, and they're doing a fabulous job with this.
Those are really great examples. You mentioned the dashboards and the data to make better decisions. Does anybody come to mind really jump out as doing that really well?
South Carolina does a good job with it. They have just recently put into place a dashboard that the board members can come in and view what's going on. There's a lot of institutions who have dashboards out there. It's
Yeah.
becoming more and more the norm.
Well, any final advice for board members, if for the board members that are listening or future board members on how they can really best fulfill their role and enable student success?
Yes. One institution I worked with was not really in touch with their students. They would come in, they would have their nice catered lunch and the boardroom and a lot of great camaraderie. The new board chair took over and said, "We're going to eat in the cafeteria with the students every time we have a board meeting." It was such an incredible way for them to get in touch with the students, get energized, and really hear what the students think about the institute. That's just one example of how board members can and should stay in touch with who's using their product.
That's really great advice. I'm on the board of MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design here in Minneapolis, and I co-chair the Student Experience Committee. This year, we're really focusing on the on-campus experience. So one time our did a tour of the dorm, and the next time student services, and then the last meeting was actually in the cafeteria eating, going through the same line and everything. And it was enlightening. So
Mhm.
I love that suggestion. And I'm personally trying to walk that talk.
Well, keep a pulse on what's going on, not only at the university. Your job is to hold the president accountable, approve the budget, oversight, set goals, objectives, but also keep a pulse on what's going on when your graduates get out into the marketplace. Are they doing well? Are you doing alumni surveys? That's a great way for administration to find out what's going on with their graduates. It's not just hey, you're graduated now, you can help pay us a little more money by donations.
Yeah.
But that information should be coming to the board to give the board a sense of, are the graduates being successful? If they are, great. What are we doing that's helping them be so successful? If not, why not? What do we need to change? Because those alumni surveys can give you incredible information about how your graduates are doing.
Yeah. And what was helpful to them, and therefore what you might dial up or down for current students to create even better outcomes.
Exactly.
Well, great advice, Drum. Thank you so much for your time and your insights on boards and student success. And certainly a tough job, but I think one that is really a calling for those who can serve and who can help students succeed.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure, Elliot. It's always fun having a chat with you.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.